through the memorial service, and there's an ancient prayer of the church that's based on an ancient tradition of the church, that it isn't St. Peter who will greet us at the pearly gates, but it's Lazarus the beggar. And that if Lazarus knows who you are, you're in. But if Lazarus doesn't know you, and that sense of looking to the margins, of being disposed to look in certain directions, and to exercise compassion in certain ways, I think, and so desiring the kingdom, not just acknowledging a theology of the kingdom, but that desiring of the kingdom, I think is a more dynamic, and it's tied in with a virtue kind of view as well. And I agree with Jamie Smith on that. But I don't think that people like Art Holmes and Nick Waltersdorf and others who talked about worldview in the past were meaning to deny that. Arthur Holmes, when he wrote about worldview, always talked about also a disposition to act and to think in certain ways. And I think the dispositional dimension of that is very important. Yeah.
As you were giving the lecture, I couldn't help but think of Mark Noll's scandal of the evangelical mind. I would be very curious to hear some of your thoughts about the pluses and minuses that he pointed out.
That was a great book. It was a Jeremiah. Here's Mark Noll already, when he writes it, acknowledged as one of the leading intellectual historians in America. I mean, right now, the evangelical historians and philosophers are dominant figures in the guild. Waltersdorf and Flanagan, and Noll and Marsden and Hatch and all of those people. So it's a little odd to read him saying we don't yet have a mind, And I happen to think that the network of Christian colleges and universities of the CCCU is an intellectual powerhouse of evangelicalism. What I worry most about is not Christian liberal arts education, but whether our churches are ready to receive those folks and continue to nurture them. And that's where I think we in the seminaries have a very important task, because the 103 or 104 members of the Christian college, the coalition of Christian colleges. But Mark I thought it was a great book, but it was a bit of an overstatement, a bit of a Jeremiah, a bit of kind of prodding us, and it was much deserved and much needed. But I think Mark himself acknowledged it. I mean, he and I did a lot of hymnody stuff together. I mean, Mark himself is a lover of Fanny Crosby hymns and all the rest. So, Mark's a pietist. I mean, when it comes down to it. So I don't think that the call to develop an evangelical mind, which I want to echo with reinforce, really is in any way incompatible with a nurturing of a strong evangelical piety and the importance of spiritual formation and drawing on the poetic wisdom of the church that often gets through to our hearts, as the example of Schleiermacher shows, better than our theological reflections might otherwise indicate. Yeah, thanks.
Over here?
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Mouw, for being here. It was a wonderful talk. I've been admiring you from afar for a long time now, for your bold affirmation and sometimes even celebration of aspects of your heritage in pietism, revivalism, fundamentalism that can be embarrassing for evangelical scholars today. I wasn't raised up in college and grad school to celebrate these aspects of our heritage. I was raised up to think very critically about them. Mark Noll, who I agree is a pietist, was my advisor in college, and it continued on from there. And I'm wondering, do you have wisdom for us, as pastors and as scholars in the evangelical community, people who are encouraging one another to think critically about our heritage, but also want to help other people to embrace our heritage, to celebrate our heritage? Do you have wisdom about how best to balance critical reflection about where we've come from on the one hand, with a kind of celebration and affirmation and so on that's edifying on the other hand?
Thanks. Well, specifically on the intellectual side of things, and I could argue about the social action kind of thing as well, but on the intellectual side of things, I'm very taken with Paul Ricoeur emphasis, the distinction between the first naivete and the second naivete. I think that in a lot of theological education today, and I have arguments with a lot of my colleagues in more liberal schools, but there's a little bit of this that rubs off on us in the evangelical world as well. It's almost as if theological education, the whole point of it is to distance ourselves from what Peter Berger liked to call ecstasy, standing apart from. Steve Evans, I think when he was teaching here a long time ago, wrote a little book on existentialism called Despair, a Moment or a Way of Life. And I like that distinction. Critical distance from a tradition has to be a moment and not a way of life. You know? And it is important for us to come to the Bible with new methods for understanding the Bible. You know, the old thing that many of us were raised on, that the Bible gives us the faith once delivered to the saints. And we got to deconstruct that a bit. The faith, well, it's, you know, there's Johannine, and there's Lucan, and there's Pauline, and it doesn't always fit together like pieces of a puzzle in a perfect sort of way. And so we get a sense of the plurality of the treatments of the person and work of Christ, say in the pages of the New Testament. And we need to wrestle with that. We need to wrestle with the critical methods of looking at the Jonah story and at the Jericho story and all the rest. And so we do need to take a step back. But then there comes a point in which we need to enter into the second naivete. So even though I know all of the questions that I did not have as a kid when I heard somebody say, we stand for the faith once delivered to the saints, I have a new view of who the saints are, drawn from every tribe and tongue and nation. I mean, we had a very narrow view of who the saints were when I was a kid. And so we need to get into all of that, but there's a certain point at which then we need to speak out of a second naivete. I've been telling this story at Fuller quite a bit. A wonderful book on African American tradition called by Albert Rabateau, the black historian, called Slave Religion. It's a wonderful book. And in there he's talking about a time in the slave movement in North America when it was really forced illiteracy. The slave owners did not want the slaves to learn how to read because it gave them a kind of leverage, a kind of power. And he gives these examples. It's a wonderful story, and this will preach. A young woman, slave woman, who was a kind of a nursemaid to the white kids. And she got them to get her a Bible, even though she didn't know how to read. And she got them to teach her how to recognize one word, and that is the name Jesus. And she would go out in the woods, and she'd open the Bible, and she would just page through, going down line by line. And when she came across the name of Jesus, she would say it out loud. That was her spiritual, devotional life, you know. And I say, in a profound sense, she had the right hermeneutic. That whole book is about Jesus. And that we need to, in the final analysis, it's all about Jesus. In the final analysis, Jesus saves is the right message to preach. And so we need to cultivate all of that critical reflection, but then it has to come back to, in certain ways, very simple formulations, not naive, not a first naivete, but a second naivete. And I miss a lot of the second naivete today in evangelicalism. And I still want to say, I think that the moments where every head bowed and every eye closed, and we sang all surrender, I surrender all, were powerful experiences of transcendence, of being in the presence of God that I miss. I miss it in alternative spiritualities that may, with some people, seem much more sophisticated, but for me, that's where I got it originally. And I want to say, too, as social action, you know, we talk a lot about how bad we have been, but long before I ever heard of Mother Teresa or Francis of Assisi, I went to rescue missions as a kid. And there were these wonderful fundamentalist Christians who every night would kneel with the same drunks and pray with them and give them their bowl of soup and their dish of ice cream and their banana. And they were the Mother Teresas of my youth, willing to kneel alongside of smelly bodies, of people who constantly disappointed them because they just went out and got drunk again. But they hung in there, and to me that's an inspiration of a certain almost a kind of Franciscan fundamentalism that I think we need to look back with charity and love toward much of what we have inherited. So. Yeah.
Gratitude than anything else.
Okay.
I teach over in the college and the graduate school, and I often self-identify as a recovering fundamentalist. My grandfather was one of the founders of the GARBC, wow. And I also grew up with the same kind of altar calls and hymns and experiences that you express. And somewhere along the line in my spiritual journey, I was running as fast as I could away from that and toward a reformed, vibrant theology.
That's good too.
And yes, and still am there theologically. But Don Dayton, I had an opportunity to meet him in my doctoral studies, and he recommended your book, Smell of Sawdust, to me.
Nice.
And I just want to thank you because that book was the beginning of the restoration of the beautiful parts of my heritage to me. And so, thank you. I just want to express that to you. I also was going to ask about Jamie Smith's book, Desiring the Kingdom. My interest is in integration of faith and learning. And we actually just read that book as faculty forum in the college last semester and had wonderful discussions about it. Given the way that you've defined the heart, and you've already responded in reaction to the book, but one of the things that frustrated me about the book was that he acknowledges this, that he never really gets to how if we're going to really focus on formation of the heart and appealing to the heart in our students, what does that look like in a Christian liberal arts college? And one of the privileges that we have at Trinity, I believe, is having a seminary at the heart of this university. And so, given your desire to bring all of this together somehow, that is also my desire. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for us in how to move forward in incorporating this pull, this trying to appeal to the heart with our students, because it is, after all, at least on the college side where they live, and yet not sacrificing the intellectual rigor that we all desire.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, when I, I taught in liberal arts college for 17 years before going to seminary, and I have a lot of, we have some shared concerns there. I've spoken at, I forget how many, but probably 70 or 80 Christian liberal arts campuses over the years. And I once sort of did a kind of informal survey. I would go to a campus and I would try to figure out how are they trying to, what are they trying to do to these people? And what's their method for doing it? Roberta Hester used to, when we do curriculum review, she would always say, what are we trying to do to them at Fuller Seminary, Insofar as we can influence the ways in which they think and feel and do, how are we doing that? And so I would do this informal survey, and it was clear that there were some colleges where what they were trying to do was to get people in the prayer groups and Bible study and maybe some evangelism in the local town. So it was extracurricular spiritual formation, supplemented by a lot of academic stuff, And then there were at Calvin College. When I was interviewed at Calvin College, I'll never forget, the president of the college, I flew over from University of Chicago, and I went through all the other interviews, and I was about ready to get the offer. And he said, he gave me this little lecture, and he said, at Calvin College, I've never forgotten this, at Calvin College, if the chapel burned down and the entire theology department dropped dead in one evening, we would be as Christian a college the next morning. Because what makes this Christian is not what happens in a theology class or in a chapel, but the way we teach chemistry, the way we teach sociology, the way we teach American literature, and the like. That was a very dramatic way of saying we have a world and life view. We have a Christian perspective, So what we were trying to do at Calvin College to people was to get them to think in the right sorts of ways, and Jamie's reacting against that a little bit. And then there's the sacred space